So much comes to mind when I start to think about the second MMA iteration of Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. But at the forefront is the fact that Izzy's back is against the wall with this one, which is a first for him in the MMA sphere. The next thing that comes to mind when I think about the UFC 287 main event, at least initially, is that I feel like this is a little bit too soon for this rematch for Izzy. I was never a fan of immediate rematches for title fights to begin with. Doing it as often as we have really detracts from the specialness of them. Personally, I feel like it should be a very rare circumstance that we see an immediate rematch, no matter how many times we've seen somebody defend the title or under what circumstances the last fight was. But given how we're operating these days, if there's ever somebody who deserves an immediate rematch by today's standards, it's Adesanya. Again, my first thought is that it's a little too soon. It feels like these two just fought. I normally tend to think in a situation like this, taking a little bit more time off would bode well for Izzy. With that being said, it's been just short of 5 months since the last fight, even though it does not feel that long ago. And one of the great things about Adesanya is that he stays active. While I typically think a bit of a layoff would be best for a fighter in a situation such as his, the more I think about it, he's probably better off getting in there sooner rather than later. He isn't one to sit around inactive, and if you know anything about the world of kickboxing, where he comes from, it's normal for those guys to fight well over 5 times a year, something that's unheard of in MMA. I've always been a big kickboxing fan myself, so when the first UFC fight got booked between Pereira and Izzy, it really gained my interest. Although at the time I felt like Pereira didn't do enough to earn a title fight, I loved the idea of it happening regardless. I was on location covering UFC 281 in New York City, and the tension all week was palpable. On media day, I asked Pereira a question that I've always wondered. Besides yourself, who do you think has the best striking skills in the UFC?
Fora você, quem você acha que tem melhor nível de trocação no UFC?
Como que é?
Fora você, quem que você acha que tem melhor nível de trocação no UFC?
Pô, o Israel.
Israel.
It was an interesting response. I never believed there was as much bad blood between these two as the promotion would have you believe heading into that fight. Kickboxing is different that way. Bad blood, whether totally genuine or for the purpose of promotion, isn't as prevalent in that sport as it is in MMA, generally speaking. But I was still surprised to hear Pereira give such high praise to the champions just days before they're set to square off. That is, of course, if you believe it to be high praise. It's totally conceivable that Pereira doesn't think very highly of anyone striking in MMA. The guys from the kickboxing world often think that way, and for good reason in all fairness. Watching that fight at MSG from press row was mesmerizing. When watching it live, it felt as though it was Izzy's fight the whole time for the most part. What sticks out in my mind a lot is how successful Izzy was with his straight cross. He landed it with a great deal of impact many times by holding out his jab to measure and then zinging that cross straight down the pipe. As successful as that tactic was, it was also very dangerous because when he was holding that jab out there, Pereira knew that his hook was within landing distance, but it worked well for him on that night. I also seem to remember feeling like in the latter rounds, Pereira was becoming visibly fatigued, which is what made it all the more mind-blowing when that fifth came around and he shocked everybody and set the MMA world on fire with the come-from-behind victory. It was all pretty foggy, taking that in live and in person, and when you watch a fight for the second time, you often catch on to a lot of things that you didn't the first time around. So when I went back to watch the tape, although Izzy controlled the majority of that fight like I remembered, I hadn't realized how much of the fight it was Pereira forcing Izzy backwards, and how often Izzy's back was up against the cage. Of course, sitting here from the comfort of my living room, it's easy for me to say, when your back hits the cage, circle left or circle right. Conventional wisdom in this game will tell you to circle away from the power hand, which is the cross most of the time. But circling away from Pereira's power hand means you're circling into his famed left hook. So you're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. And yeah, you can say, well, just don't get backed up and have your back against the cage. That's easy to say when you're not the one standing across from that terrifying monster who's seemingly made of stone and out there to knock your head off your shoulders. And I don't know if it's just me or not, but I can't help but feel a similarity to Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 2 with this fight. In the way that the confidence of Pereira going into his last fight is going to pale in comparison to the confidence he's going to have when he steps into the Octagon this Saturday night. Something else I think that gets overlooked and maybe a little underappreciated is the fact that Pereira has former light heavyweight champion Glover Teixeira in his corner. And not just for the technical expertise, but for the experience of being a champion in the UFC and operating in that machine and all the things involved with it. You have to think Pereira has the advantage of getting exceptional information and guidance when it comes to the position he's in and keeping his mind right. I honestly haven't the slightest idea what's going to happen when the cage door shuts. More often than not, when I drop these episodes, I make a prediction or am forthcoming about what I envision happening. But I'm at a loss with this one. I just know that we've never seen Adesanya in a situation like this before. He's fighting an even more dangerous Pereira than he did the first time, and his back is really against the wall here. And as incredible of a journey and story it's been for Adesanya so far, it's for these reasons that at UFC 287, this will be the most compelling fight of his entire career.